Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, I had a voice for radio. So today, I'm going to be showing you a deck. Now, what we've been doing over the last few days, we've been looking at really good Japanese decks. We've been looking at decks that have done well at the Champions League in Tokyo. We've been looking at some very weird decks. We've been looking at some very unusual decks. We've been looking at decks which involve cards from Lost Thunder. Well, today, we're taking a different tact. We're looking at a nice, cheap budget deck. We're looking at still a weird deck. It's still a very interesting deck. And it's a deck that might not be the best deck in the format, but oh my goodness, it's fun and it's interesting. And I'm going to be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a little bit excited to have a play with this one. It is a Heracross deck. It was shared on Facebook by the lovely Alex Michael Lavelle. And well, it's all based around Heracross. And in fact, the Pokemon line is very, 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 very light. It's only 4 different Pokemon, and one of them's a pre-evolution. It also plays no Tapu Lele. It is a very, very budget deck. Now, obviously, it's a non-GX deck, so it plays Shrine of Punishment. More on that in a moment. But that's pretty much it. Like, Shrine of Punishment is about the most expense you're going to be playing on this deck, except for like stuff like Cynthia, which goes in every deck. So actually, I'm a little bit excited about this, and a lot of you ask me for fun budget options, more unusual decks. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to wait for the new set to come out. This is out right now. So it all focuses around Heracross, so let's have a look at what the old Heracross actually does. It's got the ability Guts. If this Pokemon would be knocked out by damage from an attack, flip a coin. If heads, this Pokemon is not knocked out, and its remaining HP becomes 10. Which essentially means that if your opponent wants to KO you, they've got to hope you flip a tails. If you keep flipping heads, you never get KO'd as the Heracross player. You live forever. Now, there are some exceptions to this. Poison kicks in between turns and will KO you. Burn kicks in between turns and will KO you. Or if you're confused and try and attack, then you will be KO'd. So there are some things, or if Decidueye starts getting big again, which it might. I did a video about that, go check it out. Then they can KO it with Feather Arrow. But this keeps working. So if you've only got 10 HP remaining and they would knock you out, flip a coin. If heads, you just still remain at 10 HP. And the whole point here is you essentially have an invincible Heracross. And then you've got Shrine of Punishment in play, which puts 1 damage counter on each GX and EX Pokemon between turns. So essentially, if you can just survive long enough, all of the GXs on the field, because the EX have been rotated now, all the GXs on the field will just naturally get KO'd by this. Now, maybe your opponent field blowers it away. Well, if they do, they do. But for as long as it's on the field, they take a damage counter between turns. Now, you do have an attack here. It's not amazing. 50 damage for 2 grass energy. Your opponent switches are active with one of their bench. So you're not doing a lot of damage here. It's quite a low amount of damage. You're doing 50 damage. But you know what? 50 damage is alright when Shrine of Punishment is going, and to be honest, if you're not getting KO'd, ever, 50 damage a turn is quite good. But actually, it's not 50 damage a turn, because that's where the other Pokemon comes in. The Promo Lurantis. The attacks of your grass and fire Pokemon do 20 more damage to your opponent's active before applying weakness and resistance. This, ladies and gentlemen, is how this becomes a genuinely, legitimately viable deck. Because you see, now, if you've got all 4 in play, you're doing 130. And 130 is just flat out enough to KO something like a Buzzwole. But it doesn't need to be doing 130. If you've got 2 of these in play, you're doing 90. 90 will 2-hit KO pretty much any non-GX, while also, along with Shrine of Punishment, 2-hit KO any GX. You're not even playing Choice Band here, because you don't need to play Choice Band here. And that's essentially the basics of the deck. You are sitting there, rocking along, playing Heracross, and you're doing hopefully a fair amount of damage with Heracross taking advantage of Lurantis. And then, while you're doing all of that, Shrine of Punishment is kicking in some extra damage. Now, I know Shrine of Punishment won't kick in extra damage against non-GXs, but against non-GXs you don't need to do as much damage, so it doesn't really matter. You don't need Shrine of Punishment against non-GXs because they've got lower HP to begin with. And that is the basis of the deck. Now, we've got some other tricks we're going to look at in a second, but generally speaking, you get your Heracross out, you attack with Heracross, using Lurantis to boost damage, and you cross your fingers and keep flipping heads. And if your opponent doesn't have an option like Poison or Burn, and you keep flipping heads, you will win the game. I mean, maybe you deck out, but you should be able to do enough damage before you deck out. So you just win. It's that gosh darned good. And I should mention there is one Orangaroo here so that you can have a little bit of extra draw power. I should also make a quick note that given that you're relying on basic Pokemon with abilities, an Alolan Muck would basically guarantee that you never win here. So the energy line, we got some grass energy. Obviously, it's a grass deck. But we play counter energy as well. It's got low HP Pokemon. You'll often be playing from behind, especially if your opponent takes out something like a Lurantis in the early game. So counter energy here can be a lot of fun for that. And then in terms of the trainer line, a lot of stuff is very familiar. We see Cynthia, which is a great draw card. And we see Tate and Liza, which is pretty much the best alternative option. We see Guzma, which is great for dragging Pokemon off the bench and KOing them. We see Professor Kukui, which does draw you 2 cards, but it also does do an extra 20 damage, because like I've said, Heracross doesn't do that much damage. It's nice to be able to do a little bit of extra. We see 4 Ultra Ball here, because it's the best Pokemon search that we have, but we also see a couple of Nest Ball here, because you're largely playing with basics other than the Lurantis, so being able to search out your basics is very, very good. We see a Rescue Stretcher to recover some of your Pokemon, we see a Field Blower to get rid of tools, and we see the aforementioned Shrine of Punishment for spreading damage. Then we see Acrobike. Acrobike's kind of an odd one here. It's great draw, but it's item draw, so you draw a card from the top of your deck and discard one. Now, on the one hand, it makes your deck faster, but there are 2 potential downsides. One is you might have bad draws, so clearly Shrine of Punishment is a great card in this deck, and clearly if your opponent's playing a bunch of Field Blower, you are going to need to make sure that you can keep Shrine of Punishment on the field. I did mention Field Blower for getting rid of tool cards. Obviously, it gets rid of stadiums as well. But here's the thing, right? What happens if you play an Acrobike and you hit 2 Shrine of Punishment? You need those Shrine of Punishment, ladies and gentlemen. So if you go hitting Shrine of Punishment with Acrobike, that's a very, 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 very bad thing. That's not good. So that is something you do need to bear in mind here. It's not ideal. It's fine, but it is something you do just need to worry about a little bit. The other thing is it makes you more vulnerable to Garbodor. But, well, Garbodor's a single prize Pokemon. You're a single prize Pokemon. They're a Stage 1. You're a basic. They've got to flip a heads to KO you. You shouldn't be too worried about Garbodor here. And then we see probably my favourite card in the deck, Hustle Belt. Because you see, I've been talking all video about how it doesn't do enough damage. And I've been saying, well, you've got Lurantis, and yeah, you've got Professor Kukui. But the reason you don't play Choice Band here is because you play Hustle Bout. Hustle Bout with this is broken. If the Pokemon this card is attached to has 30 HP or less remaining and any damage counters on it, its attacks do 60 more to your opponent's active. So they try and KO you, you flip a heads, you don't get KO'd, now you're doing 110 for 2 energy, and you're making them switch. Don't sleep on the fact that you're making your opponent's active switch, which is actually super annoying for them. Now you're rolling. Because now with a Hustle Bout and 4 Lurantis, well, you're doing 50, 110 with a Hustle Bout, 190 with Lurantis. That's a straight KO on something like a Buzzwole GX or a Rayquaza. It's awesome. Now, there is one other card that we see here. It's Pokénav. Pokénav is fine. Pokénav is quite nice in terms of just, it helps you to get set up. What it does, it is an item card. And it lets you look at the top 3 cards of your deck and reveal a Pokemon or energy you find and put it into your hand. Good for searching out counter energy, good for just speed. And Pokénav and Acrobike are basically both in the deck because it gives you that extra little bit of speed that you may not otherwise have had. It's a fun deck. It's a cheap deck. There will be games you play against stuff like Decidueye or a deck that poisons where you can't win. There'll be decks against Alolan Muck where you can't win, and there will be decks where you keep flipping tails and you can't win. It's not a perfect, always going to win every single time deck. But it is a fun, under the right circumstances, you can win. Alex took this to League, went undefeated, won League. It's not going to happen every time. There will be plenty of times you just don't draw well enough and it goes wrong. But there will be games you win because your opponent just can't do anything because you just keep flipping heads. And when you play those games, ladies and gentlemen, this deck just becomes amazing. And that's why it deserves a test. You're probably not going to take this to a regional championship and win the whole thing. You will win some games due to bad luck, and there's not much you can do about it. But if you want a fun, different, unusual rogue deck, Heracross got yo back. Alrighty then. So now I want to hear from you guys. Tell me what you think about this deck. Tell me if you played it. Tell me if it works. Go nuts. Be nice. You know, it's important to be nice. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at the Wassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts, all of that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do so. But by far the most important thing, as always, is to look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.